The thunder cracked so violently across the Wyoming sky that Olivia Foster's horse reared up on its hind legs, nearly throwing her from the saddle before bolting in a panic she could not control. Rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see 5 feet ahead, and the wind howled with a fury that seemed intent on tearing her from the world entirely. She had been traveling from Cheyenne to visit her aunt in Casper when the storm rolled in with terrifying speed, transforming the afternoon from clear and bright to dark and dangerous in mere minutes. Her horse, a rented mare she had paid too much for at the livery, was proving to be as skittish as the stable hand had warned, though he had failed to mention just how badly the animal would react to thunder. "Easy, easy," Olivia shouted over the roar of the storm, but her words were lost to the wind. The mare galloped wildly across the open prairie, ignoring every pull on the reins, every desperate command. Water streamed down Olivia's face, soaking through her traveling dress and the wool coat she had thought would be sufficient for the journey. It was September of 1882, and the weather had been so pleasant just hours before that she had dismissed the stable hand's concerns about storm clouds gathering in the west. Now, those clouds had caught up with her, and she was paying the price for her stubbornness. The horse stumbled, and Olivia felt herself sliding sideways in the saddle. She grabbed for the pommel, but her gloved hands were too wet to find purchase. The ground rose up to meet her, and she hit the muddy earth hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. For a moment she lay there gasping, watching through the rain as her horse disappeared into the gray curtain of the storm. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or you will die out here." She struggled to her feet, her body aching from the fall. Her right ankle throbbed with a pain that made her wince with every step, but she forced herself to walk. She had no idea where she was, no sense of direction in the blinding rain. All she could do was keep moving and pray that she would find shelter before the cold and wet finished what the fall had started. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Olivia's legs trembled with exhaustion, and she could no longer feel her fingers. Her teeth chattered so violently that she bit her tongue, tasting blood. Just when she thought she would have to stop, would have to lie down in the mud and accept whatever fate awaited her, she saw a shape through the rain. A fence. A fence meant civilization, meant people, meant hope. She stumbled toward it, using the wooden rails to steady herself as she followed the fence line. The rain was so heavy now that she could barely open her eyes, but she kept moving, kept following the fence until she saw the dark outline of buildings ahead. A house. A barn. A ranch. Relief flooded through her with such intensity that she nearly sobbed. She climbed through the fence rails, too tired to look for a proper gate, and half walked, half crawled toward the house. There was a porch, she could see it now, a covered porch that promised relief from the endless rain. She made it to the steps and pulled herself up, collapsing against the wooden door and pounding on it with what little strength she had left. "Help," she tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please help." The door opened so suddenly that she nearly fell inside. Strong hands caught her, steadied her, and she found herself looking up into a face that seemed carved from stone, all hard angles and weathered brown skin. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes were a startling blue, the color of the Wyoming sky on a clear day, and they widened in surprise at the sight of her. "Good Lord," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "Get in here before you catch your death." He pulled her inside, closing the door against the storm, and suddenly the world was quieter, warmer, blessedly dry. Olivia stood dripping on his floor, shaking so hard that her bones felt like they were rattling, and tried to form words. "My horse," she managed. "Through me, I walked. I am sorry to intrude." "No apologies needed," the man said firmly. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick quilt, which he wrapped around her shoulders. "Can you walk? You need to get out of those wet clothes before you freeze." Olivia tried to take a step and gasped as pain shot through her ankle. The man caught her before she could fall, scooping her up in his arms with an ease that suggested he was used to carrying heavy loads. She should have protested, should have insisted she could manage on her own, but she was too cold and too tired to care about propriety. He carried her through the house to a bedroom and set her gently on the bed. "I will get you some dry clothes," he said, his eyes carefully avoiding her soaked form. "They will be too big, but they will be warm. Can you manage to change yourself, or do you need help?" "I can manage," Olivia said, though she was not entirely certain it was true. Her fingers were so numb she could barely feel them, let alone make them work well enough to handle buttons and laces. He nodded and left the room, returning a moment later with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. "These are the smallest things I have," he said, setting them on the bed beside her. "There is a towel here too. I will make you something hot to drink. Take your time." He left, closing the door behind him, and Olivia sat for a moment staring at the dry clothes. Then, with fingers that refused to cooperate, she began the slow process of peeling off her wet garments. Her traveling dress was ruined, the fine green wool now stained with mud and torn at the hem. Her petticoats were just as bad, and her shoes were likely lost forever. She managed to get everything off and toweled herself dry, her skin red and raw from the cold. The shirt and trousers the man had given her were indeed too large, but they were warm and soft from many washings, and she was grateful for them. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, moving slowly on her injured ankle, she found him in the kitchen stirring something in a pot on the stove. The house was small but well kept, with sturdy furniture and a fireplace where flames danced and crackled. She could see now that he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26, just a few years older than her own 23 years. He looked up as she entered and gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit," he said. "You need to warm up." Olivia sat, and he brought her a cup of something that steamed and smelled of herbs. "Tea," he explained. "With honey and a bit of whiskey, it will help with the cold." She took the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it and savoring the warmth. The first sip burned going down, but the second was better, and by the third she could feel heat spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "You saved my life." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps, but you were the one who did it." "I am Olivia Foster from Cheyenne." "Thomas Irving," he replied. "This is my ranch, though calling it a ranch might be generous. Just me and a few head of cattle, some chickens." "It is a wonderful ranch," Olivia said, looking around. "And you keep it very well." Thomas busied himself at the stove, and Olivia studied him in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. There was a quietness about him, a sense of solitude that suggested he was not used to company. She wondered how long he had been living out here alone, how long since he had spoken to another person. "How bad is the storm?" she asked. Thomas glanced toward the window, where rain still pounded against the glass. "Bad enough. This looks like it could last through the night, maybe into tomorrow. Sometimes these prairie storms will sit for days, just dumping rain until the land cannot take any more." Olivia's heart sank. "I was supposed to reach Casper by tomorrow evening. My aunt is expecting me." "I am sorry, but there is no way you are going anywhere until this clears." Even if you had a horse, which you do not, it would be suicide to try to travel in this weather. The creeks will be flooding, the ground will be nothing but mud. You will have to wait." He said it matter-of-factly, with no room for argument, and Olivia knew he was right. She was stranded here at this ranch with this stranger. The thought should have frightened her, but somehow it did not. There was something about Thomas Irving that made her feel safe despite their circumstances. "I will send word to your aunt as soon as the weather clears," Thomas said, as if reading her thoughts. "Let her know you are safe, but for now you need to rest. That ankle needs wrapping, and you need food and sleep." He brought her a bowl of stew, simple but hearty, and she ate it gratefully while he knelt beside her chair and examined her ankle. His touch was gentle despite his rough appearance, his fingers careful as he probed the swollen joint. "Not broken," he said finally. "Just a bad sprain. You are lucky. I will wrap it, and you need to stay off it as much as possible for the next few days." He retrieved strips of cloth and wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency. Olivia watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his eyes, the way he bit his lower lip slightly when he was focused. She found herself wondering about him, about what kind of man chose to live alone in the middle of the prairie, about what stories lay behind those blue eyes. When he finished, he stood and stepped back as if suddenly aware of how close he had been to her. "You should sleep," he said. "You can take the bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Olivia protested. "This is your home. I will sleep by the fire." "You are injured and you have been through an ordeal," Thomas said firmly. "You need a proper bed. I will be fine out here. I have slept in worse places." There was a tone in his voice that suggested argument would be futile, so Olivia simply nodded. He helped her back to the bedroom, and she sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, the blankets clean and warm. She was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow, exhaustion claiming her completely. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, but she could still hear rain pounding on the roof. She sat up slowly, testing her ankle. It still hurt, but not as badly as the night before. Someone had left a pitcher of water and a basin on the dresser, along with her own clothes, now clean and dry. She washed her face and hands, then struggled into her chemise and a borrowed shirt, leaving off the heavy petticoats and dress in favor of comfort. She found Thomas outside on the porch, staring out at the rain. The storm had lessened somewhat, but it was still coming down steadily, turning the yard into a sea of mud. He turned when he heard her approach, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," she said. "Or is it still morning?" "Just past noon," Thomas replied. "You slept for nearly 14 hours. Olivia's eyes widened. 14 hours. I am so sorry. I did not mean to impose on your hospitality for so long." "You needed the rest," Thomas said simply. "Are you hungry?" She realized she was ravenous. "Yes, very." He made her breakfast, or lunch rather, eggs and bacon and fresh bread that he must have baked himself. They ate in companionable silence, and Olivia found herself stealing glances at him, curious about this quiet cowboy who had taken her in without question. "How long have you lived here?" she asked finally. 3 years, Thomas said. "I bought the land with money I saved working cattle drives, always wanted a place of my own. It must get lonely living out here by yourself." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "I like the quiet." After years of being around other people, constantly moving, constantly dealing with the noise and chaos of cattle drives, the quiet is welcome. "I think I can understand that," Olivia said softly. "Sometimes the world can be overwhelming." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt a strange warmth in her chest. His eyes were so blue, she thought, like the heart of a flame. "What were you doing traveling alone?" Thomas asked. "It is not safe for a woman to be on the roads by herself." I know, Olivia admitted. But I had already delayed the trip twice, and my aunt was insistent that I come. She has been ill and she wanted to see me. I hired a guide in Cheyenne, but he took sick the morning we were supposed to leave. I should have waited for him to recover or found someone else, but I was impatient. I thought I could make the journey on my own. I was wrong. You were lucky, Thomas said quietly. It could have ended much worse. I know, Olivia whispered. Thank you again for helping me. He nodded and stood clearing the dishes. You should rest that ankle. I need to see to the animals, make sure they are secure in this weather. He put on a heavy coat and hat and went out into the rain, leaving Olivia alone in the house. She moved to the window and watched him walk to the barn, his figure growing indistinct in the downpour. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond simple gratitude for his help. He was different from the men she had known in Cheyenne, different from the smooth, talking businessmen and the pampered sons of wealthy families who had courted her. Thomas Irving was real in a way they were not, solid and dependable and utterly without pretense. The day passed slowly. Olivia read from the few books Thomas had on his shelves, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry. But she found one well-worn copy of poems that surprised her. She would not have taken him for a man who read poetry, but the book fell open to pages that had clearly been read many times, and she saw pencil marks in the margins, annotations in a careful hand. When Thomas came back inside, soaked through despite his coat, she asked him about it. A gift from my mother, he said quietly. Before she passed, she loved poetry, used to read it to me when I was a boy. I am not much for reading, but I keep that book close. I am sorry about your mother, Olivia said. It was a long time ago, Thomas replied, but she could see the old grief in his eyes. I was 16. Fever took her quickly. And your father died when I was 10, kicked by a horse. It was just me and my mother after that until she was gone too. I have been on my own since. Olivia's heart ached for him. To lose both parents so young, to have spent the last decade alone. Do you have any other family? An uncle in Texas, but we do not correspond much. He offered to take me in after my mother died, but I wanted to make my own way. I think he was relieved, to be honest. He already had 6 children of his own. They fell silent, and Olivia searched for something to say that would not sound like pity. She sensed that Thomas Irving was not a man who wanted pity. Would you read something to me? She asked instead, gesturing to the book of poems. It has been a long time since I heard poetry read aloud. He looked surprised, but he took the book and opened it to a familiar page. His voice, when he began to read, was low and steady, and the words took on a new life in his deep tones. Olivia closed her eyes and listened, transported by the rhythm of the verses, by the sound of rain on the roof, and the crackle of the fire and Thomas's voice weaving them all together. When he finished, he closed the book carefully and set it aside. My mother read that one often, he said. Said it reminded her of my father. It is beautiful, Olivia said, and found that her eyes were wet with tears she could not quite explain. That night, Thomas made dinner, a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and they talked more easily than before. Olivia told him about her life in Cheyenne, about her work as a schoolteacher, about the students she loved, and the challenges of trying to educate children whose parents did not always see the value in learning. Thomas listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. You must be good at it, he said. Teaching, I mean, you have a patience about you. I try, Olivia said, but it is not always easy. Some days I wonder if I am making any difference at all. You are, Thomas said with certainty. Even if you cannot see it now, you are. Every person who takes the time to teach, to pass on knowledge, they are making the world better. My mother taught me to read and write, taught me to love books and learning. That gift stayed with me even after she was gone. Your students will remember you the same way." His words touched her deeply, and she found herself blinking back tears for the second time that day. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Olivia helped Thomas with small tasks around the house, insisting that she could not simply sit idle while he worked. She cooked dinner while he saw to the animals, and they ate together, their conversation flowing more naturally now. She learned that he loved this land with a fierce passion, that he had dreams of expanding his herd, of building this ranch into something substantial. She told him about her own dreams, about wanting to open a school that would serve all children regardless of their ability to pay, about her belief that education was the key to building a better future. "You think big," Thomas said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Is that wrong?" Olivia asked. "No," he said. "It is rare. Most people think small, think safe, but the world needs people who think big." On the third day, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. Thomas went out to assess the damage and came back shaking his head. "The creek has flooded," he said. "The bridge is out. Even when the rain stops completely, it will be days before the water recedes enough to make crossing safe, and the roads will be nothing but mud for a week after that." Olivia's heart sank. "My aunt must be frantic with worry." "I will ride to town as soon as possible and send a telegram," Thomas promised. "Let her know you are safe and will come as soon as you can travel, but I am afraid you are stuck here for a while longer." Strangely, Olivia found that the thought did not distress her as much as it should have. Yes, she worried about her aunt, but she would send word soon. And in the meantime, she was here in this small ranch house with Thomas Irving. Over the following days, as they waited for the water to recede, Olivia found herself growing more comfortable in this new life. She helped Thomas with the chores, learning to feed the chickens and collect eggs, learning to make the simple but satisfying meals he preferred. He taught her to play cards in the evenings, and they would sit by the fire, trading stories and laughter. She learned that beneath his quiet exterior, Thomas had a dry wit that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. He learned that Olivia was stronger than she looked, that she was not afraid of hard work or getting her hands dirty, that she had opinions about everything from politics to literature, and was not shy about sharing them. "You are not like the women I have met," Thomas said one evening, dealing cards for another hand of poker. "Is that good or bad?" Olivia asked, arranging her cards. "Good," he said without hesitation. "Very good." She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something in his eyes, something that made her heart beat faster. She realized with a start that she was falling for him, for this quiet cowboy who had saved her from the storm. And from the way he was looking at her, she thought he might be falling for her too. But neither of them said anything, not yet. They simply played their cards and pretended that the air between them was not charged with possibility. On the sixth day, Thomas rode to town and sent the telegram to Olivia's aunt. He came back with supplies and a reply that had come surprisingly quickly. Olivia's aunt was relieved to hear she was safe, and insisted she stay until she was fully recovered and the roads were clear. There was no need to risk another accident by traveling too soon. "She sounds like a practical woman," Thomas said, handing Olivia the telegram. "She is," Olivia agreed, reading her aunt's words. "She raised me after my parents died. She is the only family I have." "You lost your parents too?" Thomas asked quietly. Olivia nodded. "When I was 12, cholera. My aunt took me in, raised me as her own. I owe her everything." "Then we are both orphans," Thomas said. "Both alone in the world." "Not alone right now," Olivia said softly, meeting his eyes. Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than words. Thomas reached out and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, saying nothing, saying everything. That night, as Olivia lay in bed, she admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was in love with Thomas Irving. She loved his quiet strength, his gentle hands, his dry humor, and his poetry-reading voice. She loved the way he looked at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. She loved the life he had built here, the dreams he carried in his heart, and she had no idea what to do about it, because eventually the roads would clear and she would have to leave. She would have to go to her aunt in Casper, would have to return to her life in Cheyenne, to her teaching position and her little apartment and her carefully ordered existence. And Thomas would stay here on his ranch, living his solitary life. The thought of leaving him made her chest ache with a pain that had nothing to do with her healing ankle. The next morning, she woke to find the sun shining brightly through the window. The storm had finally broken completely, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling. She dressed quickly and went outside, where Thomas was already working in the yard, assessing the damage and beginning repairs. "It is beautiful," she said, breathing in the fresh air. "It is," Thomas agreed, but he was looking at her, not the landscape. They worked together that day, Olivia helping where she could despite Thomas's protests that she should rest. They repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by the wind, collected branches that had fallen in the storm, checked on the cattle to make sure none had been injured. It was hard work, but Olivia found satisfaction in it, found joy in working beside Thomas, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas called a halt to the work. They sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset, both too tired to speak. "The water should be down enough to cross in another day or two," Thomas said finally, and his voice was flat, emotionless. "Oh," Olivia said, and her heart sank. "That is good news." "Is it?" Thomas asked, turning to look at her. Their eyes met, and Olivia felt like she could not breathe. "I do not know," she whispered. Thomas stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. "I have been alone for 10 years, he said, his voice rough. "I told myself I liked it that way, that I did not need anyone. And then you showed up on my doorstep, half frozen and hurt, and everything changed." Olivia stood, her legs shaking, and moved to stand beside him. "How did it change?" He turned to face her, and the emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "I do not want you to leave," he said simply. "I know I have no right to ask you to stay. I know you have a life, responsibilities. But these past days with you here, they have been the happiest of my life. And the thought of going back to being alone, of never seeing you again, it is unbearable." "Thomas," Olivia breathed, and then his hands were cupping her face and he was kissing her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, filled with all the longing they had both been holding back. Olivia kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could taste the sweetness of him, could feel the strength in the arms that held her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said hoarsely. "I know it is too soon. I know it makes no sense, but I love you, Olivia Foster. I think I have loved you since the moment you collapsed on my doorstep." "I love you too," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much it terrifies me." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "Stay," he whispered against her lips. "Stay with me. Marry me, build a life here with me." "What about my aunt?" Olivia asked, though her heart was already singing yes, yes, yes. "We will bring her here," Thomas said. "She can live with us if she wants, or we will build her a house on the property, close enough that you can care for her but far enough that she has her privacy. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I will make it work. Just please, Olivia, stay with me." Olivia thought of her life in Cheyenne, her teaching position, her apartment, and then she thought of this man, this ranch, this new life spreading out before her like the endless prairie sky. There was no contest. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay." Thomas let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again and again, as if he could not get enough of her. They went inside as the stars began to appear, and they talked late into the night, making plans, dreaming dreams. Thomas would ride to Casper and meet Olivia's aunt, would explain everything and ask for her blessing. They would marry as soon as possible, a simple ceremony in town with whatever witnesses they could find. Olivia would write to her landlord in Cheyenne and arrange to have her belongings sent to the ranch. She would look into teaching opportunities in the area, or perhaps she would start that school she had always dreamed of, right here where children of ranchers and farmers could come to learn. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked as they sat by the dying fire, Olivia tucked against his side. "Are you sure you will not regret giving up your life in Cheyenne?" "I am not giving up anything," Olivia said firmly. "I am gaining everything. You, this ranch, a chance to build something real." "How could I ever regret that?" He kissed the top of her head, and she could feel him smiling. "I prayed the storm would never clear," he admitted quietly. "Every morning I woke up and heard the rain still falling, and I was glad. I knew it made me selfish, knew you needed to get to your aunt, but I could not help it. I wanted more time with you." "I am glad the storm lasted as long as it did," Olivia said. "If it had cleared sooner, we might never have had the chance to know each other. We might have said goodbye and never seen each other again." "That would have been a tragedy," Thomas murmured. "The worst kind." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the embers glow, and Olivia felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The next day, Thomas rode to Casper to meet with Olivia's aunt. Olivia stayed behind, her ankle still too weak for the journey, and spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom and planning how she would make it a proper home. She found curtains in a trunk in the bedroom, pretty things that had clearly been packed away long ago, and she hung them in the windows. She rearranged the furniture to make the space more welcoming, and she picked wildflowers from the meadow near the house and put them in a jar on the table. When Thomas returned late that evening, he had a broad smile on his face. "Your aunt sends her love and her blessing," he announced, sweeping Olivia into his arms. "She says she knew from your telegram that something had changed, that you sounded different. She is thrilled for us, and she very much looks forward to meeting me properly at the wedding." "She is not upset that I am not coming to care for her?" Olivia asked. "She says she is not so sick that she needs constant care, and that she will not stand in the way of your happiness. She will come for the wedding and stay as long as she likes. I think you will find her a formidable ally in all your plans." Olivia laughed with relief and joy. Everything was falling into place, as if the universe itself had conspired to bring them together. They were married 2 weeks later in a small church in town. Olivia wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen that she had sewn herself with fabric Thomas had bought for her. Thomas wore his best suit, and he looked so handsome that Olivia felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the altar. Her aunt stood beside her, tears streaming down her weathered face, and a few of Thomas's friends from town served as witnesses. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Olivia felt her heart might burst from happiness. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with food and music and dancing. Olivia's aunt charmed everyone with her sharp wit and her stories, and Olivia could see Thomas relaxing in her presence, winning her over with his quiet competence and obvious devotion to Olivia. "You chose well," her aunt whispered to her at one point in the evening. "He is a good man, that one. He will take care of you." "We will take care of each other," Olivia said, watching Thomas talk with the guests. "Even better," her aunt said, squeezing her hand. That night, after the guests had gone and her aunt had retired to the small guest room they had prepared for her, Olivia and Thomas were finally alone. They stood in the bedroom, and suddenly, Olivia felt shy, nervous in a way she had not expected. Thomas seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands gently and kissed them. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world." But Olivia shook her head. "I am ready," she said. "I am just nervous. I have never done this before." "Neither have I," Thomas admitted, and Olivia felt a rush of love for him, for his honesty, for the vulnerability in his eyes. They came together slowly, gently, learning each other with patience and care. Thomas was tender and attentive, and Olivia gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. It was not perfect, it was awkward in places and uncertain, but it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Olivia's head on Thomas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Thomas replied, his arms tightening around her. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." Olivia's aunt stayed with them for 3 weeks before declaring that she needed to return to Casper and her own life. "You two do not need an old woman underfoot," she said firmly, though Olivia could see she had enjoyed her time at the ranch. "Besides, I have friends and commitments back home. But I will visit often, and you must come to see me as well." "Of course," Olivia promised, embracing her aunt tightly. "Thank you for understanding, for supporting me in this." "You are happy," her aunt said simply. "That is all I have ever wanted for you. And he makes you happy. Anyone can see that." After her aunt left, Olivia threw herself into making the ranch truly their home. She planted a garden, started learning to preserve food for the winter, practiced her cooking until she could make meals that did not just sustain but delighted. Thomas built her a chicken coop that was larger and sturdier than the old one, and together they increased their flock. Olivia also began teaching the children of nearby ranchers and farmers, just a few students at first who would come to the house twice a week for lessons. But word spread quickly about the schoolteacher at the Irving Ranch, and soon she had a dozen regular students. Thomas built her a small schoolhouse on the property, a single room with benches and a blackboard, and Olivia felt her heart swell with pride every time she walked into it. The first winter was hard. Snow came early and stayed late, and there were days when they could not leave the house at all. But Olivia found she did not mind. She and Thomas would sit by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. They made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside, and Olivia thought she had never been so content. Spring came with a rush of green and the sound of running water as the snow melted. Olivia discovered she was pregnant, and Thomas's joy was so profound that he could barely speak when she told him. He treated her like she was made of glass for the rest of the pregnancy, hovering and worrying until she had to shoo him away so she could do her work. Their son was born in early November, a healthy baby with Thomas's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him James, after Thomas's father, and Olivia thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than the sight of her husband holding their child, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "You are perfect." "I cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Olivia said, exhausted but happy. "This is our life, and it is only beginning." James was a good baby, calm and sweet-tempered. Olivia continued teaching when she could, bringing James with her to the schoolhouse where he would sleep in a basket while she conducted lessons. Her students adored him, fighting over who would get to hold him during breaks. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Olivia's dark curls and a temper that made them both laugh. They named her Eleanor, and she was everything her brother was not, loud and demanding and utterly fearless. "She is going to keep us on our toes," Thomas said, cradling the infant as she wailed her displeasure at something only she understood. "Good," Olivia said. "I would not want it any other way." The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. The ranch prospered, Thomas's careful management and hard work paying off as the herd grew and the land proved fertile. Olivia's school became a fixture of the community, and children from miles around came to learn. Some stayed for just a season, others for years, but all of them left knowing how to read and write and think for themselves. James grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the animals, who would follow his father everywhere and pepper him with questions. Eleanor was wild and free, always exploring, always testing boundaries, making her mother's hair turn gray with her exploits. 2 more children followed, another boy they named Henry and a second daughter they called Rose, and the house was always full of noise and chaos and love. Thomas proved to be an extraordinary father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught his children to ride and rope, to care for the land and the animals, to read poetry by the fire on cold winter nights. He taught them that education was important, that kindness mattered, that hard work was its own reward. And he loved Olivia with a devotion that never wavered, never dimmed. Even after years of marriage, after children and hardships and the simple wearing down of daily life, he would still look at her across the dinner table like she was the most remarkable thing he had ever seen. "I still cannot believe you stayed," he said one evening, after the children were in bed and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I still wake up sometimes and think I dreamed it all." "I stayed because I love you," Olivia said simply. "Because this life we have built together, this family, this is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know I wanted it." "I prayed the storm would never clear," Thomas said, pulling her close. "And in a way it never did. It brought you to me and you changed everything. You cleared away the loneliness, the emptiness. You brought light and love and life to this place. You are my storm and my sunshine, Olivia Irving." "And you are mine," Olivia whispered, kissing him softly. "My shelter, my home, my heart." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of wind through the grass. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. It had been 15 years since that storm had stranded Olivia at Thomas's ranch. 15 years since she had stumbled onto his porch, half frozen and desperate. 15 years since he had opened his door and his heart to a stranger. And in those 15 years, they had built a life that neither of them could have imagined. A life full of love and laughter, of hard work and simple joys, of children and community and purpose. They had weathered their own storms, the droughts and the harsh winters, the illnesses and the setbacks that came with ranching life. But they had weathered them together, drawing strength from each other, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Olivia's aunt had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years ago, and they had buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers grew thick in the summer. The children would visit her grave and leave flowers, and Olivia would tell them stories about the woman who had raised her, who had given her blessing to a love born in a storm. The school had grown too, now a permanent structure that served not just the children of ranchers, but also the children of the small town that had sprung up nearby. Olivia had trained 2 other teachers to help her, and together they were building something that would last, something that would shape generations to come. Thomas's ranch was now one of the most successful in the area, his cattle prized for their quality, his land well managed and productive. But he had never lost his love for the simple things, the quiet moments, the satisfaction of work well done. He still read poetry by the fire on winter nights, still held Olivia like she was precious, still thanked God every day for the storm that had brought her to him. James, now 13, had announced that he wanted to be a rancher like his father, and Thomas had begun teaching him the more complex aspects of managing the land. Eleanor, 11 and still fearless, had declared she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, much to Olivia's delight. Henry, 8, was the family's dreamer, always drawing pictures and making up stories. And Rose, just 6, was their wild card, too young yet to know what she wanted but showing promise in everything she tried. They were a family, bound by blood and love and the land they worked together. And as Olivia sat on the porch with Thomas, his arm around her shoulders, she thought about how different her life would have been if not for that storm. She would have made it to Casper, would have visited her aunt and returned to Cheyenne. She would have continued teaching, would have perhaps eventually married someone suitable, someone safe and expected. She might have been content, might even have been happy in a quiet, unremarkable way. But she would never have known this wild, fierce love that made her feel alive in every moment. She would never have known Thomas, would never have built this life, would never have had these children, this home, this purpose. The storm had changed everything, had taken her from the path she thought she was on and set her on a new one, a better one. And Thomas had prayed it would never clear, had wanted to keep her with him forever. And here she was, 15 years later, still here, still his, still exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noting the contemplative look on her face. "I am thinking about that storm," Olivia said, "about how it changed my life. Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if it had not happened?" "Never," Olivia said firmly. "Not for a single moment. That storm brought me to you, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life, our family, this is everything I could ever want." Thomas pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I love you," he said. "More now than even that first day I told you. I did not think that was possible, but every day I find new reasons to love you, new depths to this feeling." "I love you too," Olivia said. "My cowboy, my husband, my home." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, one by one, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep and Olivia started to rise, but Thomas held her still. "I will check on them," he said. "You rest." He went inside and Olivia heard his footsteps moving through the house, heard his low voice soothing whichever child had stirred. She smiled, thinking about what a good father he was, how naturally he had taken to it despite having no real model growing up. He came back a few minutes later and sat beside her again. "Eleanor was having a nightmare," he reported. "She is settled now." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool, then went inside to their own bed, where they made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded. Afterward, Olivia lay in Thomas's arms, listening to his breathing slow as he fell asleep, and she thought about the future. James would likely take over the ranch one day, would build on what his father had started. Eleanor would teach, would shape young minds the way Olivia had. Henry and Rose would find their own paths, would make their own marks on the world. And she and Thomas would grow old together, would watch their children grow and have children of their own, would sit on this porch in their later years and remember all the moments that had made up their life together. It was a good future, a blessed future. A future made possible by a storm that had stranded her at a lonely ranch, and a cowboy who had prayed it would never clear. As Olivia drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in her husband's arms, she sent up her own prayer of thanks to whatever forces had conspired to bring them together. She thanked the storm for its fury, the horse for its panic, the miles of empty prairie that had led her to this door. She thanked Thomas's kindness, his gentle hands, his patient heart. And she thanked herself for having the courage to stay, to choose love over safety, to build a life with a man she had known for less than a week, but had somehow recognized as her destiny. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, by births and graduations and all the small moments that make up a life. Thomas's hair turned gray at the temples, and Olivia found lines around her eyes that had not been there before. But they still loved each other with the same intensity, still reached for each other in the night, still found joy in each other's company. When James was 18, he married a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They built a house on the far edge of the property, and soon the first grandchild arrived, a boy with Thomas's blue eyes and Olivia's dark hair. Thomas wept when he held his grandson for the first time, overcome with emotion at the continuation of the family line, at the thought of this legacy they had built together. Eleanor did indeed become a teacher, taking over much of the work at the school when Olivia decided to step back and spend more time with her grandchildren. Henry surprised them all by showing a talent for business, and he eventually moved to town and opened a store that supplied ranchers with tools and equipment. Rose married an army officer and moved east, though she came home to visit as often as she could. The house that had once seemed so small now felt empty with just Olivia and Thomas rattling around in it, but they did not mind. They enjoyed the quiet, the return to the simplicity of their early days together. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, Thomas still reading poetry in his deep voice, Olivia still listening with her eyes closed, transported by the words and the sound of him. "You remember that first day?" Olivia asked one evening when they were both well into their 60s, and the porch had become their favorite place to spend time. "When I collapsed on your doorstep. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even soaking wet and half frozen," Thomas said, smiling at the memory. "I remember my heart starting to beat faster the moment I saw your face. I knew even then. I knew you were going to change my life." "I was terrified," Olivia admitted. "Terrified of the storm, terrified of being lost and alone. And then you opened the door and suddenly I was not terrified anymore. I was safe." "You were always safe with me," Thomas said softly. "From that first moment, I would have done anything to protect you, to keep you from harm." "I know," Olivia said. "I have always known that. It is one of the reasons I love you so much. You made me feel safe in a way I had not felt since my parents died. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a true home. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living." "You gave me all of that too," Thomas said. "Before you, I was just existing, just going through the motions. You made me live again. You made me happy." They held hands on the porch, their fingers intertwined, and watched the sunset paint the sky. The ranch was quieter now, James and his family managing most of the work, but Thomas still went out every day to check on things, to feel the land beneath his feet, to be part of the rhythm of ranch life. The school still operated, now run by Alina and her assistant, teaching a new generation of children. The town had grown up around them, bringing more people, more opportunities, but the ranch remained the same, a constant in a changing world. When they were both in their 70s, Thomas fell ill. It was nothing dramatic, just a slow weakening, a gradual decline that spoke of a life fully lived and a body finally wearing out. Olivia cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her, sitting by his bedside, reading to him, holding his hand. "I am not afraid," Thomas told her one evening, his voice weak but his eyes still bright. "I have lived a good life, better than I ever deserved. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "Every moment with you has been a gift." "Do not cry," Thomas said, reaching up to wipe her tears. "We have had 55 years together, 55 years of love and happiness. That is more than most people ever get. We are blessed." "I know," Olivia sobbed, "but I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Thomas said. "I will always be with you, in your heart, in our children, in this ranch we built together. Death cannot take that away." He passed peacefully in his sleep a week later, his hand in Olivia's. She held him for a long time afterward, memorizing the lines of his face, the feel of his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had been her everything for over half a century. They buried him on the hill next to her aunt, where he could look out over the ranch he had loved so much. The entire community came to the funeral, testifying to the impact Thomas had had, to the lives he had touched with his quiet kindness and his steady presence. Olivia stood by the grave and thought about the storm that had brought them together, about the cowboy who had prayed it would never clear. She thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments both big and small that had made up their life together. And she thanked him, silently, for everything he had given her, for the life they had built, for the love that would never die. She lived another 10 years after Thomas passed, years filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the school and the ranch and the community she had helped build. But part of her was always waiting, always ready, for the moment when she would see him again. When that moment finally came, when her own life drew to a close, she was ready. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, a smile on her face as if she was seeing something wonderful. They buried her beside Thomas on the hill, and the family placed a single stone to mark both graves. It read simply, "Thomas Irving and Olivia Foster Irving, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, together always." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own mark while respecting the foundation that Thomas and Olivia had laid. The school still stood, now a larger building but still bearing Olivia's name and continuing her mission of education for all. And on the hill where they were buried, wildflowers grew thick every summer, swaying in the prairie wind, standing sentinel over the two people who had found love in the middle of a storm and had built a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The storm had stranded her at his ranch, and the cowboy had prayed it would never clear. And in the end, it never did. Because the love they found that week lasted far beyond the weather, far beyond their lives, becoming something eternal, something that would live on in the land they had worked, the children they had raised, the community they had built. It was a love story for the ages, born in rain and wind and desperation, tempered by hard work and commitment, strengthened by time and trials. A simple story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives, who built something beautiful and lasting in the wild heart of Wyoming. And if sometimes, on stormy nights, the people who lived at the ranch in later years claimed they could hear voices on the porch, a man's deep rumble and a woman's soft laughter, well, who was to say they were wrong? Love like theirs did not simply disappear. It soaked into the land, into the very boards of the house, becoming as much a part of the ranch as the grass and the sky and the endless prairie stretching away to the horizon. The storm had brought them together, but it was love that had made them stay, love that had built a life, love that had created a legacy. And that love lived on, in every sunset watched from that porch, in every lesson taught in that school, in every generation that worked that land and called it home. Thomas had prayed the storm would never clear, and his prayer was answered in ways he could never have imagined. Because the storm did not just bring Olivia to his ranch for a few days. It brought her to him forever, and together they had created something that would outlast any weather, any hardship, any trial. They had created a love that would never end.